A successful lawyer moved to a quiet neighborhood in Arizona and did everything she could to have a statue of the Virgin Mary removed from her neighbor's garden. She said it was inappropriate, that it devalued the properties. She made the owner of the statue cry in front of all the neighbors. But 6 months later, something happened to that lawyer, something she was never able to explain, and what she did afterward shocked everyone, a miracle of the Virgin Mary that no one expected. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I would love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. 7 in the morning. Dorothy leaves the house and goes to the front garden with a mug of coffee. 55 years old, retired nurse, widow for 15 years. She worked for 30 years at the municipal hospital, took care of hundreds of patients, saw people being born and saw people pass away. She learned that life is short and that every day is a gift. When her husband passed away, she thought she wouldn't be able to handle it, but she did. One day at a time. Every day she does the same thing. Wakes up at 6:30, has coffee, goes to the garden at 7, takes care of the plants. And then she goes to the corner where there is a statue of the Virgin Mary. The statue is about 60 centimeters tall, a blue mantle, already faded by the sun after so many years. Open hands. A serene face. It was the last gift her husband gave her before he passed away. He arrived home on a Saturday morning with the statue. "I brought this for you," he said. "I know how important your faith is. I want you to have a special place to pray." 3 days later, he went to the hospital. He didn't come back, but the statue remained. And since then, every day, Dorothy goes to it and prays in silence, with her eyes closed, giving thanks, asking for protection for her family. The longtime neighbors already know this ritual. Everyone respects it. Some even ask Dorothy to include someone in her prayers. Do you know someone like that? Someone who has this moment of prayer every day? Dorothy has been like this for 15 years. It was like this until a new neighbor arrived. Diane moved in on a Saturday in September, 2 moving trucks, a team of 6 uniformed people, every box labeled with color codes, everything organized, everything controlled. Dorothy watched from the kitchen window. She saw a blonde-haired woman step out of a black SUV to supervise the move, 50 years old, lawyer, specialist in lawsuits for large corporations. She had never lost an important case. In the first week, Dorothy heard Diane arguing with the neighbor. "Your dog barks at 7 in the morning, every day." "That's unacceptable," Diane complained. "But he's still a puppy," the neighbor replied. "Then fix it, or I'll have to take action," she threatened. On Friday, she complained to the neighbor on the right. "The leaves from your tree are falling into my yard," Diane said. "It's a tree, Diane." "Leaves fall," he replied. "Then hire someone to sweep them up." "I didn't move here to have dirt in my garden," Diane insisted. "Do you know someone like that? Someone who wants to control everything around them? Someone who doesn't rest until the world is exactly the way they want it to be?" Diane was like that. Her house was impeccable. Every piece of furniture in its place, every picture perfectly aligned, not a single cushion out of order. The garden was beautiful. A landscaper every week, grass trimmed to the right height, plants neatly pruned, stones carefully aligned, and from the very first day, every time she looked at Dorothy's garden, her eyes stopped on the statue of the Virgin Mary. She frowned. Dorothy noticed. She pretended not to see. 3 weeks after moving in, Diane knocked on Dorothy's door. It was Sunday. Dorothy had just returned from Mass. "Hi, Diane. Would you like to come in? I made orange cake," Dorothy offered. "No, I came to talk about something," Diane said. Dorothy waited. "That statue in your garden," Diane continued. Dorothy's heart started racing. "What about it?" Dorothy asked. "Look, Dorothy, I did my research before moving here. This is a high-value neighborhood, well regarded. And that statue, It doesn't match the visual standard, Diane explained. Visual standard? Dorothy asked, puzzled. Yes, each house has a certain style, a certain appearance. And your statue stands out. It draws too much attention, Diane said. Dorothy stayed silent for a few seconds. Diane, that statue was a gift from my husband. Before he passed away, Dorothy replied. I understand it has sentimental value, but have you thought about putting it inside the house? Or maybe in the backyard, where no one sees it, Diane suggested. It's been in my garden for 15 years. No one has ever complained, Dorothy said. Exactly, 15 years. Maybe it's time to rethink it, to update things, Diane insisted. Dorothy took a deep breath. I'm sorry, Diane, but the statue is staying where it is, Dorothy said. It's just a matter of aesthetics, Dorothy. You don't need to take it personally, Diane said. And she left without saying goodbye. In the following weeks, Dorothy noticed that something had changed. The neighbor across the street, Martha, who always waved in the mornings, began avoiding eye contact with Dorothy. The couple from number 47, who used to stop and chat in the late afternoon, now crossed the street whenever they saw Dorothy coming. At the neighborhood bakery, Dorothy heard whispers. Did you hear? Diane said the statue lowers property values. Seems like she wants the association to do something about it. Poor Dorothy. But still, 15 years with that statue there? Dorothy pretended she hadn't heard. She paid for the bread and left. At home, she sat on the porch and cried. Years living in that neighborhood, she knew everyone, helped neighbors when they needed it, took care of children, brought food to those who were sick. And now people were pulling away because of gossip. Dorothy tried to keep up her routine, but it hurt. It hurt to know that people she had known for years were turning their backs on her. It hurt to know that Diane was managing to isolate her little by little. A month after the first conversation, Dorothy received a note slipped under her door. Neighborhood Association meeting. Topic: Aesthetic standardization of the neighborhood. Dorothy knew what it was about. The meeting was held at Richard's house, the president of the association, a 70-year-old man who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. There were about 20 people there. Dorothy knew almost all of them. Diane was sitting in the front row, legs crossed, notebook in hand. Richard opened the meeting. Well, Diane asked us to talk about some concerns, Richard said. Diane stood up. Thank you, Richard. Look, I know I'm new here. I moved in 2 months ago, but I chose this neighborhood because it has a reputation, a standard, and I think we all have a responsibility to maintain that standard, Diane said. She looked directly at Dorothy. There are some elements that need to be reconsidered. Decorations that draw too much attention. That don't fit the standard, Diane continued. Everyone knew what she was talking about. Dorothy felt her face grow hot. Diane, if you want to talk about my statue, just say it outright, Dorothy said. Silence. All right, I'll say it outright, Diane replied, crossing her arms. That religious statue in your garden is inappropriate. Inappropriate why? Dorothy asked. Because it's old. Because it makes the street look, Diane said. Look like what? Dorothy insisted. Different, Diane replied. Dorothy, your husband passed away 15 years ago. Maybe it's time to move on, to go forward, to stop clinging to the past, Diane said. The silence in the room was absolute. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. Her throat tightened. You don't have the right to speak to me like that, Dorothy said, her voice trembling. I'm being honest. Someone had to be, Diane replied. Dorothy couldn't respond. She grabbed her purse and left. She cried the entire way home. What would you do in her place? Would you remove the statue or stand your ground? That night, Dorothy couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything Diane had said. The words hurt. They hurt because they were cruel. Close to midnight, Dorothy couldn't take it any more. She got out of bed and went to the garden. The moon was full. The statue of the Virgin Mary seemed to glow in the silvery light. Dorothy knelt on the grass, still in her pajamas, her knees on the cold ground. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Tell me what I should do." She prayed, she cried, she asked for guidance. She stayed there for almost an hour, the cold of the night sinking into her bones, tears running down her face. When she finally went back to bed, she was exhausted. She fell into a heavy sleep, and she dreamed. In the dream, Dorothy was in the garden again, but it was not night. It was dawn. The light was golden, unlike any light she had ever seen, and standing before her was the Virgin Mary, not the statue, she herself. The blue mantle shone. Her face held a kindness impossible to describe. Dorothy wanted to speak, but she couldn't. The Virgin Mary smiled and said only one thing: "Don't remove it. She will need it." "Who?" Dorothy tried to ask. "Who will need it?" But the image was already fading. Dorothy woke up suddenly, her heart racing, sunlight coming through the window. It was almost 7 in the morning, and those words stayed in her mind all day. She will need it. She who? Need what? In the days that followed, Dorothy tried to return to her normal routine, but now there was something different, a peace she couldn't explain, even with the neighbors' looks, even knowing that Diane continued spreading gossip. Even feeling the isolation, Dorothy felt peace, a certainty in her chest that she was doing the right thing. And she decided the statue would stay where it was, not out of stubbornness, not out of pride. Because someone was going to need it. Dorothy still didn't know who or why or when, but she trusted. 1 month after the meeting, Diane disappeared. The car wasn't in the garage. The lights stayed off. Newspapers piled up at the door. No one saw her coming or going. Dorothy thought she had traveled for work. Lawyers travel a lot. After a week, Diane came back. And she was different. Dorothy saw her arriving on a Thursday afternoon. Diane got out of the car slowly, as if every movement took effort. Deep dark circles under her eyes, messy hair, wrinkled clothes, no makeup. She didn't look like the same woman who had arrived in the neighborhood with 2 moving trucks, a tailored suit, and high heels. And the strangest thing, Diane didn't complain about anything. The neighbor's dog was barking. Diane said nothing. The fallen leaves in her yard. Diane said nothing. She walked past Dorothy's statue and didn't even look at it. She simply went into the house and closed the door. Dorothy realized it. Something had happened. Something serious. A week later, Dorothy was watering the garden when she heard voices. Diane was talking on the phone. The window was open. "I know it's the best hospital." Dorothy froze. "The doctor said the treatment isn't working. They've tried everything." Diane's voice faltered. "My grandson, Margaret. He's 6 years old." Silence. "I don't know what to do. I've always known what to do. My whole life I've known. And now?" The sound of crying. Dorothy slowly stepped away, the watering can trembling in her hand. She shouldn't have heard that, but she did, and now she understood everything. The dark circles under the eyes, the messy hair, the lack of complaints, the change in behavior. Diane's grandson was sick, seriously sick, and the treatment wasn't working. That night, Dorothy couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the boy, so young, and she thought about the words from the dream. She will need it. Was the she in the dream Diane? Was the woman who wanted to remove the statue of the Virgin Mary the very person who would end up needing her? Can you imagine? The woman who seemed to have everything under control couldn't control what mattered most. The next morning, Dorothy woke up before the sun rose. She lay in bed thinking about what she had heard. At 6 in the morning she got up, made coffee, went out to the garden. She knelt before the statue of the Virgin Mary, and then, with a clarity she hadn't expected, she knew what to do. From that day on, Dorothy began to include Diane's grandson in her prayers, every day, every morning, before the statue that Diane so badly wanted to remove. She didn't know the boy's name. She didn't know exactly what he had. She didn't know anything beyond what she had overheard by accident, but she prayed. Virgin Mary, take care of this boy, protect him, give strength to his family, give strength to Diane. Yes. Dorothy prayed for Diane too, the same woman who had made her cry in front of all the neighbors. The same woman who had said, maybe it's time to move on. Dorothy prayed for her because it was the right thing to do. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. It was between her and the Virgin Mary. 2 weeks later, Dorothy made a decision. She made a lasagna, her mother's recipe. She put it in a baking dish, covered it with aluminum foil, and left it at Diane's door, along with a simple note. I am praying for your grandson from the heart. She didn't sign her name. She didn't want Diane to know it was her. The following week, she left a pie. The next one, a soup. Diane never came to say thank you. But Dorothy saw through the window that she picked up the food, that she took it inside. And one day, Dorothy saw something she didn't expect. Diane was in the garden holding one of the notes Dorothy had left, and she was crying. Not a restrained cry, the cry of someone who is exhausted, of someone who can't take it anymore. Dorothy understood. The food wasn't just food. It was someone saying, you are not alone. And Diane needed to hear that. The following weeks were the hardest. Dorothy learned through conversations with the neighbors that Diane was practically living at the hospital. Her grandson had gotten worse. Diane's daughter, the boy's mother, had quit her job to stay with him. The entire family was in despair. Dorothy increased her prayers. It was all Dorothy could do. Pray and wait. On a Thursday night, something happened. Diane was at the hospital, in her grandson's room. The boy had gone through another procedure. He was sleeping. The room was small, white, full of machines and monitors. The constant sound of beeping. Diane hadn't slept properly in weeks. Her eyes burned. Her body ached. Her head felt heavy. She sat in the armchair beside the bed, held her grandson's hand, closed her eyes. Just 1 minute, she thought, just 1 minute of rest. And then something woke her. A smell, strong, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. Roses? Diane opened her eyes suddenly, looked around. The room had no flowers, no plants, nothing, but the smell was there, intense, as if someone had brought in a huge bouquet of fresh roses. Diane stood up, checked the hallway, empty. The smell continued, even stronger. And then she looked at her grandson, and she saw, beside his bed, a woman dressed in blue. Diane felt the air disappear from her lungs. The woman's mantle shone in an impossible way in that light, a blue that seemed to have a light of its own. Her face carried a peace Diane had never seen in anyone. Serene, calm, full of kindness, and her hands were extended over the boy, open, in a posture of blessing. Diane couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She stood there, frozen, her eyes wide open. The woman didn't look at her. She was focused on the boy, as if he were the only thing that mattered. Diane opened her mouth to say something. No sound came out, and then the woman turned her head. Her eyes met Diane's. There was so much love there, so much compassion, so much certainty, eyes that seemed to say, everything is going to be all right. Diane blinked. Once. The woman vanished. She was no longer there, but the smell of roses lingered. For long minutes, Diane let herself fall into the armchair, shaking, her heart racing. She looked at her grandson. He was sleeping peacefully. Diane didn't know what had just happened, but she knew that something had changed. The next morning, the doctors ran tests, and they were confused. The doctor called Diane into the hallway. The numbers have improved. Improved? Significantly. The treatment seems to be working now. Diane felt her legs weaken. But you said that. I know what we said, and we don't know how to explain it. Sometimes it happens. The body responds in ways medicine can't predict. In the weeks that followed, the boy kept improving. Gradually, consistently, the doctors ran test after test, looking for a scientific explanation. They didn't find one. The boy started eating on his own. He started smiling again. 3 months after the day Diane saw the woman in blue, her grandson was discharged. Remission. The doctors used words like exceptional response and atypical progression. Diane knew there was another word: miracle. Coincidence or something more? Diane returned home on a spring Saturday. The sun was strong. The air smelled of earth and plants. She parked in the garage and stayed there for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months: the diagnosis, the treatment, the worsening, the despair, the sleepless nights, and that night at the hospital. The smell of roses that appeared out of nowhere, the woman in blue beside her grandson's bed, the eyes that met hers. There was no denying what she saw. There was no logical explanation. There was no rational argument. She saw it. Diane got out of the car and walked slowly toward the front garden and stopped. Dorothy was there, kneeling in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary, praying, as she did every day, the same statue of the Virgin Mary that Diane had tried to remove, the same statue she had called inappropriate. Diane stood still, watching, and then she looked at the statue for real, paid attention for the first time: the blue mantle, the open hands, the serene face. It was identical to the woman she had seen at the hospital. Diane waited for Dorothy to finish praying. When Dorothy turned around, she saw Diane standing by the fence. "Was it you? The notes? The food?" Diane asked. Dorothy nodded. "Why? After everything I did?" Diane asked. "Because someone asked me not to give up on you," Dorothy replied. "Who?" Diane asked. Dorothy looked at the statue and smiled. Diane entered Dorothy's house for the first time. It was a simple house, old but well-kept furniture, family photos on the walls, the smell of coffee, everything different from Diane's house. They sat in the living room. Dorothy made tea, brought cookies. Diane held the cup with both hands. She stayed silent for a while, and then she began to speak. She talked about her grandson's diagnosis, the day her daughter called crying, the trip to the hospital, the doctors explaining that the treatment would be long. "I thought I would fix it," Diane said. "I always fix everything. That's what I do. My job is to find solutions. I've never lost an important case." She paused. "But there was no solution. There was nothing I could do. No strategy," Diane continued. She talked about the months of treatment, the trips back and forth to the hospital, the sleepless nights. And then came the news that it wasn't working, that they had tried everything, Diane said. Tears ran down Diane's face. She didn't wipe them away. "I collapsed. Everything I had built in life, my career, my reputation, my control, none of it mattered anymore," Diane said. And then she talked about that night at the hospital, the smell of roses, the woman in blue, the hands in a position of blessing. "I saw a woman in blue beside my grandson's bed. I saw her hands over him. I smelled roses," Diane said. She looked at Dorothy. "I don't believe in these things. I never have. My whole life I've been the rational one, the skeptic, the one who demands proof for everything," Diane said. She took a deep breath. "I'm a lawyer, Dorothy. I believe in evidence, in facts, in things I can see and measure and present in a courtroom," Diane continued. A long pause. "But I saw it, with my own eyes. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination. I was awake," Diane said. Dorothy held her hand. "You don't need to explain," Dorothy said. "I need to understand," Diane replied. "Why?" "Your grandson is fine. He's alive. He's home. Isn't that what matters?" Dorothy asked. Diane fell silent. "I spent my entire life controlling everything, and the only time I truly needed help, it came from a place I didn't even believe existed," Diane said. "How can you stand believing in something you can't prove?" Diane asked. Dorothy thought for a moment. "I can't. Faith holds me. On hard days when I don't have strength, faith carries me, Dorothy replied. Diane remained silent for a long time, and then she asked, "Can you teach me how to pray?" Dorothy led Diane to the garden. The sun was setting. The two of them stopped in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary. "I don't know what to do," Diane said. "I've never prayed in my life. I don't know the words." "You don't need to know words. You don't need memorized prayers. Just speak." "As if you were talking to a friend," Dorothy replied. "A friend?" Diane asked. "That's how I do it, every day. I talk about my life, about my worries, and I give thanks," Dorothy explained. Diane looked at the statue, the blue mantle, the open hands, the serene face, the same eyes that had met hers that night in the hospital. She took a deep breath. And for the first time in her life, the lawyer who had always had all the answers, who had always controlled everything, surrendered. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was real, but thank you. For my grandson, for his life, for everything." Tears streamed down her face. "And I'm sorry. Sorry for everything I did, for everything I said, for trying to have this statue removed," Diane said. Dorothy placed her hand on Diane's shoulder. The two of them stood there in silence. Spring morning, the sun is strong, the sky is clear. Dorothy leaves the house. A coffee mug in her hand, 7 in the morning, as always. She walks to the front garden, goes to the statue of the Virgin Mary, prays in silence, and then she hears a voice. "Good morning," said Diane. Dorothy turns around. Diane is at the fence that separates the two properties, smiling. It's not the tense smile from before. It's a real smile. "Good morning, Diane," Dorothy replied. The two talk for a few minutes about the weather, about the plants, about life. Diane is no longer the woman who arrived in the neighborhood obsessed with control. She is still a lawyer, still works, still likes organization, but there is something different about her now, a calm that didn't exist before. Dorothy looks at Diane's garden and stops. "Is that new?" Dorothy asked. Diane smiles. "It is," Diane replied. In the corner of Diane's garden there is a statue of the Virgin Mary, 60 centimeters, blue mantle, open hands, serene face. Dorothy's eyes fill with tears. "Diane," said Dorothy. "My grandson asked for it," Diane explained. "He said he wanted the lady in blue near the house." Dorothy can't speak. "You know," Diane continued, "I spent months trying to make you remove that statue from your garden. I said it was inappropriate, that it didn't fit." She laughs, a light laugh. "And now I have one just like it," Diane said. Sometimes the person who fights faith the most is the person who needs it the most. Dorothy never imagined that that statue, a gift from the husband she lost 15 years ago, would be the instrument to transform someone's life. Diane never imagined that the neighbor she tried to bring down would be the person who would pray for her grandson when no one else had hope. He had no way of knowing that that statue would do much more than that. Diane never imagined that the neighbor she tried to bring down would be the person who would pray for her grandson when no one else had hope. The woman who believed in nothing she couldn't prove, saw something she can't explain. And the woman who wanted to remove the statue of the Virgin Mary now has one in her own garden. What happened that night at the hospital? The doctors say it was an exceptional response to treatment. Diane knows what she saw. Dorothy knows what she dreamed. And the 6-year-old grandson knows that a lady in blue was by his side. Maybe it doesn't matter which explanation you choose to believe. What matters is that a 6-year-old boy is healed. What matters is that two women who were enemies are now friends. What matters is that on an ordinary street with ordinary houses and ordinary people, something extraordinary happened, and in a garden under the hot sun, a statue of the Virgin Mary remained standing. Now there are two. One in Dorothy's garden, another in Diane's garden, and between them a fence that once separated two enemies. and now separates two friends. Before finishing, I want to invite you to be part of our prayer community for the Virgin Mary, a space of faith and hope where people from all over the world come together to pray and share the graces they have received. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this chain of prayer, click below and become a member of the channel today and come pray with us. And look, if you made it this far, to the very end of the story of Dorothy and Diane, do one thing for me. Write the word garden in the comments. Because it was in a garden that everything began, and it was in a garden that two lives were transformed. I want to see how many hearts this story has reached. Every time I read garden in the comments, I will know that one more person believes that the miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Write in the comments about a miracle you have already witnessed, and share this video with someone who needs to renew their hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue blessing and protecting you and your family. Amen.